Welcome, dear listener, to a quiet journey through one of America's most fascinating chapters. Tonight, we'll explore the streets of 1920 Chicago, where ordinary people navigated extraordinary times. Whether you're settling in for the evening or finding a moment of calm, let this gentle exploration of history carry you to a different world. On the morning of January 17th, 1920, Chicago awakened to a transformed world. The Volstead Act had taken effect at the stroke of midnight, and with it, the legal sale of alcoholic beverages had vanished from American life. The great city by Lake Michigan, with its towering buildings and bustling streets, would spend the next 13 years learning to navigate this new reality in ways both expected and surprising. In the early morning light of that first day of Prohibition, streetcar conductor William O'Brien made his usual rounds through the city's neighborhoods. The familiar taverns and saloons that had dotted every corner for decades stood shuttered, their windows dark and their doors locked. Where once the warm glow of gaslight had spilled onto sidewalks from neighborhood gathering places, now only empty storefronts remained, their proprietors having cleared out their stock in the final hours before the law took effect. William had worked the same streetcar route for nearly 15 years, and he knew every establishment along the way. Murphy's Tavern on Halsted Street had been a gathering place for Irish dock workers since before the Great Fire. The German Beer Garden on North Avenue had served families from the surrounding neighborhoods for 3 generations. The Italian wine shop near Taylor Street had been where immigrant families celebrated weddings and christenings with bottles brought from the old country. Now, as his streetcar clanged along its familiar tracks, William observed a city in transition. Some former saloon owners had converted their establishments to ice cream parlors or soda fountains, hoping to maintain their customer base through legal refreshments. Others had simply closed their doors, unsure how to adapt their businesses to the new legal landscape. But even in those first weeks, perceptive observers like William began to notice subtle changes in the rhythm of city life. Certain restaurants seemed to attract unusually large crowds in the evening hours. Hardware stores reported increased sales of bottles, corks, and other supplies that might be used for home brewing. Grocery stores found themselves selling unusually large quantities of grapes, hops, and other ingredients that had previously been used primarily by commercial brewers and distillers. The city's wealthy neighborhoods adapted with particular creativity. On the Gold Coast, where Chicago's elite maintained their mansions overlooking Lake Michigan, private dinner parties became more elaborate affairs. Hostesses who had once served wine with their meals now offered exotic punches and creative cocktails that seemed to appear from nowhere. The servants who worked in these grand homes learned to be discreet about their employers' beverage choices, understanding without being told that certain aspects of social entertaining had become private. Matters. The neighborhood Baker's Tail Inn, the neighborhood of Little Italy on Taylor Street, lived a baker named Giuseppe Martelli who had emigrated from Tuscany 20 years earlier. Giuseppe's bakery had been a gathering place for the Italian community, where men would stop for fresh bread and pastries on their way to work in the nearby factories and stockyards. Before Prohibition, Giuseppe had also sold wine made from grapes, shipped from California vineyards, continuing a tradition that connected his customers to their homeland. When the Volstead Act took effect, Giuseppe faced a difficult decision. The wine sales had provided a significant portion of his income, helping to support his wife Maria and their 3 children. The bakery alone might not generate enough revenue to maintain their modest but comfortable life in the apartment above the shop. Giuseppe was a man of careful habits and thoughtful demeanor. Each morning, he would rise at 4 o'clock to begin preparing the day's bread, working by lamplight in the pre-dawn darkness. The familiar routine of mixing dough, tending the ovens, and arranging displays had become a meditation that connected him to generations of bakers in his family. The warm scent of baking bread that filled his shop each morning created an atmosphere of comfort and community that drew customers not just for sustenance, but for the sense of belonging that came from sharing in old-world traditions. As the years. Weeks passed, Giuseppe noticed that some of his regular customers began asking subtle questions about whether he might be able to help them obtain certain ingredients for home cooking projects. Mrs. Benedetti, an elderly widow who lived in the apartment building across the street, wondered if Giuseppe knew where she might find the right type of grapes for making grape juice that could be preserved for special occasions. Mr. Rossi, who worked as a foreman at the nearby steel mill, inquired whether Giuseppe might be able to recommend suppliers for glass bottles and corks that could be used for storing homemade preserves. Giuseppe understood that his customers were asking about more than grape juice and preserves. The Italian community had centuries of experience in winemaking, and many families had maintained traditions of home fermentation that were deeply connected to their cultural identity. The new law didn't change their knowledge or their desire to maintain these connections to their heritage, but it did create challenges in obtaining the necessary supplies and ingredients. After much consideration and discussion with Maria, Giuseppe decided to expand his business to include what he carefully described as homebrewing and preserving supplies. He began stocking bottles, corks, and other equipment that could be used for legitimate food preservation, while also maintaining connections with suppliers who could provide high-quality grapes during the harvest season. His customers understood that Giuseppe was helping them maintain traditional food preservation practices, and they appreciated his discretion and reliability. The arrangement worked well for everyone involved. Giuseppe's customers could obtain the supplies they needed for their traditional food preparation, while Giuseppe could supplement his bakery income through these additional sales. The community maintained its cultural practices, and Giuseppe continued to serve as a trusted resource for families who wanted to preserve their connections to Italian traditions. Giuseppe's approach to navigating Prohibition reflected the practical wisdom that many immigrant communities brought to the challenge of maintaining their cultural practices while adapting to American laws. Rather than viewing the new regulations as obstacles to overcome through illegal activity, they found ways to work within the system while preserving the traditions that gave meaning to their daily lives. The bakery continued to serve as a community gathering place, where neighbors would stop to share news, discuss local politics, and maintain the social connections that made their neighborhood feel like home. Giuseppe's reputation for discretion and reliability made him a trusted figure in the community, someone who could be counted on to help families navigate the practical challenges of maintaining their traditions in a changing legal environment. The society hostess and her dinner parties on the city's North Shore, in the elegant neighborhood of Lake Forest, lived Catherine Whitman, the wife of a prominent attorney who specialized in corporate law. Catherine had grown up in Chicago society and had learned from her mother the art of entertaining that was essential to maintaining social position and supporting her husband's professional advancement. Before Prohibition, Catherine's dinner parties had been notable for their excellent French wines and imported champagnes, carefully selected to complement the elaborate meals prepared by her skilled cook. The Whitman home was a stately Georgian mansion set back from the street behind mature oak trees, with gardens that overlooked Lake Michigan. The house had been designed for entertaining, with a formal dining room that could accommodate 20 guests, a drawing room furnished with antiques brought from European travels, and a library lined with leather-bound books that reflected the family's education and refinement. Catherine approached the challenge of Prohibition with the same careful planning and attention to detail that she brought to all aspects of her social responsibilities. She understood that her role as a hostess was not simply about providing food and drink, but about creating an atmosphere where important business relationships could be maintained and community connections could be strengthened. The legal changes didn't alter the underlying social needs that her entertaining served. but they did require creative adaptations in how she fulfilled those needs. Working closely with her cook, Mrs. Patterson, who had been with the family for more than a decade, Catherine developed new approaches to menu planning and presentation that maintained the sophistication her guests expected while adapting to the new legal reality. They experimented with elaborate punches made from fruit juices and creative non-alcoholic cocktails that provided visual interest and conversation topics. The dining room table settings became more elaborate, with additional courses and more intricate presentations that extended the length of dinner parties and created more opportunities for meaningful conversation. Catherine also began hosting smaller, more intimate gatherings that focused on activities other than dining. She organized afternoon salons where guests could discuss literature, art, and current events in a relaxed atmosphere. She arranged evening musicales where local musicians would perform in her drawing room, creating cultural experiences that brought people together for purposes beyond simple socializing. These adaptations proved successful in maintaining Catherine's position as one of Chicago's leading hostesses. Her guests appreciated the creativity and thoughtfulness she brought to entertaining, and her dinner parties continued to be sought-after invitations among the city's social elite. The challenges of Prohibition had actually enhanced Catherine's reputation as a hostess who could create memorable experiences regardless of the constraints she faced. Catherine's approach reflected the broader adaptation strategies that Chicago's upper-class families employed during Prohibition. Rather than viewing the new laws as obstacles to their social life, they found ways to enhance other aspects of entertaining while maintaining the quality and sophistication that were important to their social position. The emphasis shifted from the specific beverages served to the overall experience provided to guests, leading to innovations in menu planning, entertainment, and social activities that enriched Chicago's cultural life. The success of Catherine's adaptations also demonstrated the resilience of Chicago's social structures during this period of legal change. The underlying needs for community connection, business networking, and cultural expression that had always been served by social entertaining continued to exist, and creative hostesses like Catherine found ways to fulfill those needs within the new legal framework. The corner pharmacist's dilemma. Dr. Herman Schmidt operated a pharmacy on Lincoln Avenue, in a neighborhood that was home to German immigrants and their descendants. Dr. Schmidt had emigrated from Bavaria as a young man and had built his business through careful attention to his customers' health needs and his reputation for professional integrity. His pharmacy was more than a place to fill prescriptions. It served as a community health center where neighbors came for advice about minor ailments, information about new medical treatments, and the kind of personal attention that was often unavailable from busy physicians. The pharmacy occupied the ground floor of a 3-story brick building, with Dr. Schmidt and his wife Greta living in the apartment upstairs. The shop was arranged with careful precision, featuring glass cases filled with patent medicines, shelves lined with bottles of various remedies, and a prescription counter where Dr. Schmidt would carefully measure and mix medications according to physicians' orders. The familiar sense of herbs, medicines, and cleaning compounds created an atmosphere of clinical competence that reassured customers about the quality of care they would receive. When Prohibition took effect, Dr. Schmidt faced an unexpected complication in his professional practice. The Volstead Act included provisions that allowed physicians to prescribe alcohol for medicinal purposes, and pharmacists to fill such prescriptions under specific regulatory guidelines. This meant that Dr. Schmidt's pharmacy became one of the few legal sources of alcoholic beverages in the neighborhood, but it also placed him in the position of serving as a gatekeeper for what many people viewed as a normal part of their social and cultural life, the medicinal alcohol. Provisions created genuine ethical dilemmas for Dr. Schmidt. He had always taken pride in his professional integrity, and his commitment to providing appropriate health care to his customers. The idea of using medical prescriptions as a way to circumvent laws he might personally disagree with conflicted with his sense of professional responsibility. At the same time, he recognized that some of his regular customers had legitimate medical needs that could be addressed through properly prescribed medicinal alcohol. Dr. Schmidt decided to handle medicinal alcohol prescriptions with the same careful attention to detail and professional standards that he applied to all aspects of his pharmacy practice. He would only fill prescriptions written by licensed physicians, and he would maintain detailed records of all such transactions as required by federal regulations. He would not provide advice or suggestions about how customers might obtain such prescriptions, nor would he engage in conversations about the social or political aspects of prohibition laws. This approach satisfied Dr. Schmidt's sense of professional ethics while allowing him to serve the legitimate medical needs of his customers. Some community members appreciated his careful adherence to professional standards, while others found his approach frustratingly rigid. Dr. Schmidt understood that not everyone would agree with his decisions, but he felt comfortable that he was maintaining the integrity that had always been the foundation of his professional practice. The medicinal alcohol regulations also created new administrative burdens for Dr. Schmidt's pharmacy. Federal inspectors would periodically review his records to ensure compliance with regulations, and he was required to maintain detailed documentation of inventory, prescriptions filled, and remaining supplies. These requirements added significantly to the paperwork involved in operating his pharmacy, but Dr. Schmidt approached them with the same methodical attention that he brought to all aspects of his business. As months passed, Dr. Schmidt observed interesting changes in his neighborhood's approach to health and wellness. Some customers began showing increased interest in herbal remedies and traditional health practices that their families had brought from Germany. Others became more attentive to preventive health measures, perhaps recognizing that maintaining good health was particularly important when access to certain traditional remedies had become more complicated. The pharmacy continued to serve as a community gathering place where neighbors would stop to discuss local news, share information about family events, and maintain the social connections that made their neighborhood feel like home. Dr. Schmidt's reputation for professional integrity and community service made him a trusted figure who could provide reliable information and advice about navigating the practical challenges of daily life during a time of significant social change. The factory workers' evening routine. Michael Kowalski worked at the massive Hawthorne Works factory on the city's west side, where Western Electric manufactured telephone equipment for the rapidly expanding communications industry. Michael had emigrated from Poland 10 years earlier and had found steady employment at the factory, where his mechanical skills and reliable work habits had earned him promotion to a supervisory position overseeing a team of assembly workers. The factory employed more than 40,000 workers, making it one of the largest industrial facilities in the United States. The scale of the operation was impressive, with multiple buildings covering hundreds of acres, railroad tracks bringing in raw materials and taking out finished products, and a complex social structure that included workers from dozens of different ethnic backgrounds. Michael's job required not only technical skill, but also the ability to communicate effectively with workers who spoke various languages and came from different cultural traditions. Before Prohibition, Michael's evening routine had included stopping at Kowalski's Tavern on his way home from work. The tavern was owned by another Polish immigrant who was not related to Michael but shared his surname, and it served as an informal community center where Polish workers would gather to share news from the old country, discuss local politics, and maintain connections to their cultural heritage. The tavern provided a comfortable environment where men could relax after long days of factory work. speaking Polish without self-consciousness and enjoying foods that reminded them of home. When the Volstead Act took effect, Kowalski's Tavern was forced to close, leaving Michael and his co-workers without their familiar gathering place. The loss was felt deeply throughout the Polish community, not just because of the beverages that were no longer available, but because the tavern had served social and cultural functions that went far beyond simple drinking. It had been a place where new immigrants could find information about housing and employment, where experienced workers could share advice with newcomers, and where the community could maintain its connections to Polish traditions and customs. Michael and several of his co-workers decided to create alternative arrangements for maintaining their community connections. They began organizing informal gatherings in each other's homes, rotating hosting responsibilities among different families. These gatherings focused on sharing meals prepared according to traditional Polish recipes, discussing news and politics, and providing mutual support for the challenges of immigrant life in industrial Chicago. The home gatherings proved successful in maintaining community connections, though they required more organization and planning than the spontaneous socializing that had been possible at the tavern. Michael found that hosting these gatherings in his apartment gave him opportunities to strengthen relationships with his co-workers and neighbors in ways that enhanced both his personal life and his effectiveness as a supervisor at the factory. Michael's wife, Anna, played an important role in organizing these community gatherings. She had maintained connections with other Polish women in the neighborhood, and she understood how to prepare the traditional foods and create the comfortable atmosphere that made their apartment feel welcoming to guests. Anna's skills in traditional cooking and hospitality became valuable community resources that strengthened the social bonds among Polish families in their neighborhood. The factory where Michael worked also adapted to the social changes brought by Prohibition. The company had always recognized that maintaining good relationships among workers from different ethnic backgrounds was important for productivity and workplace safety. When traditional gathering places like ethnic taverns were forced to close, the company began organizing more workplace social activities, including picnics, sports leagues, and cultural events that provided opportunities for workers to socialize in constructive ways. These workplace initiatives proved beneficial for both workers and management. Michael found that the increased social interaction among his team members improved communication and cooperation during working hours. The company discovered that workers who had opportunities for positive social interaction were more likely to remain with the company and less likely to be involved in workplace conflicts or labor disputes. The jazz musician's new venues. Louis Washington was a trumpet player who had grown up in Chicago's South Side and had developed his musical skills through years of playing in neighborhood clubs and dance halls. Louis had learned to play by listening to the great musicians who passed through Chicago, and he had developed his own distinctive style that combined traditional blues with the innovative harmonies and rhythms that were becoming known as jazz music. Before Prohibition, Louis had regular engagements at several clubs on the South Side where he would play for audiences that included both African American residents of the neighborhood and white visitors who came to experience the exciting new musical styles that were emerging in Chicago's black community. These venues had provided steady income for Louis and other musicians, while also serving as important cultural centers where new forms of American music could develop and find audiences. When the Volstead Act took effect, many of the clubs where Louis had played were forced to close or significantly modify their operations. The legal changes created challenges for musicians who depended on these venues for their livelihood, but they also created opportunities for creative adaptation and innovation in how music was presented to Chicago audiences. Louis began seeking new venues for his music, including private parties, wedding receptions, and social gatherings organized by various community organizations. he discovered that many wealthy families on the North Shore were interested in hiring jazz musicians for their private entertainments, creating new opportunities for black musicians to perform for white audiences in more intimate settings than had been common in the club environment. These private engagements required Louis to adapt his musical style and repertoire to different audience expectations and social contexts. Playing for a wedding reception in Lake Forest required different musical choices than performing in a South Side club, and Louis learned to read audiences and adjust his performances accordingly. The skills he developed in adapting to different venues and audiences made him a more versatile and successful professional musician. Louis also began collaborating with other musicians to create small ensembles that could provide entertainment for various types of social events. These groups were flexible enough to perform in living rooms, restaurant dining rooms, or outdoor garden parties, depending on the venue and occasion. The smaller ensemble format encouraged musical innovation and improvisation, contributing to the development of jazz as an art form that emphasized creativity and spontaneous expression. The changes in Chicago's entertainment landscape during Prohibition created opportunities for African American musicians to reach new audiences and develop new forms of artistic expression. While the closing of traditional venues created challenges, the demand for musical entertainment in alternative settings provided income opportunities and encouraged musical innovation that contributed to Chicago's growing reputation as a center for jazz music. Louis found that his reputation as a reliable and talented performer spread through word of mouth recommendations among Chicago's social networks. Satisfied customers would recommend him to their friends and associates, creating a network of engagements that provided steady income and opportunities for artistic growth. The personal relationships he developed with customers also provided insights into different aspects of Chicago society and culture that enriched his understanding of the city's diverse communities. The music that Louis and other Chicago musicians created during this period reflected the energy and creativity of a city that was adapting to significant social changes while maintaining its cultural vitality. Jazz music, with its emphasis on improvisation and individual expression, seemed to capture the spirit of innovation and adaptation that characterized Chicago during the Prohibition era. The neighborhood police officer's daily beat officer, Patrick O'Malley, had walked the same beat in the Irish neighborhood of Bridgeport for 8 years, and he knew every family, business, and street corner in his assigned territory. Patrick had grown up in Bridgeport himself, the son of Irish immigrants who had settled in the neighborhood when he was a child. His understanding of the community went beyond professional requirements. He had personal connections and family relationships throughout the area that influenced how he approached his duties as a police officer. Before Prohibition, Patrick's job had involved the routine challenges of urban policing, responding to domestic disputes, investigating petty crimes, maintaining order during community events, and building relationships with residents that helped prevent more serious problems from developing. The neighborhood had its share of challenges, including poverty, unemployment, and the social tensions that sometimes arose among different immigrant groups. But Patrick had developed effective approaches to managing these issues through community engagement and practical problem solving. When the Volstead Act took effect, Patrick faced new challenges that complicated his relationship with the community he served. Prohibition created a class of federal crimes that affected people who had previously been law-abiding citizens, and Patrick had to decide how to enforce laws that many community members viewed as unreasonable intrusions into their personal lives and cultural traditions. Irish community in Bridgeport had strong traditions surrounding social drinking that were deeply connected to their cultural identity. Wakes, weddings, christenings, and other important community events had always included alcohol as part of the celebration, and these traditions didn't disappear simply because federal law had changed. Patrick understood that completely rigid enforcement of prohibition laws would put him in conflict with people he had known all his life and would undermine the community relationships that made his policing effective. Patrick developed a practical approach to prohibition enforcement that focused on maintaining public order and community safety while avoiding unnecessary conflicts over private behavior that didn't harm others. He would respond to complaints about public intoxication or disorderly behavior, regardless of whether alcohol was involved. But he wouldn't actively investigate private gatherings or family celebrations unless they created genuine public safety concerns. This approach required careful judgment and sensitivity to community dynamics. Patrick had to distinguish between activities that posed real threats to public safety and private behavior that violated federal law but didn't harm the community. He also had to maintain good relationships with federal agents who were responsible for enforcing prohibition laws, while preserving his effectiveness as a neighborhood police officer who depended on community cooperation. Patrick's approach proved successful in maintaining both law and order and community relations. Crime rates in his beat remained low, and residents continued to view him as a trusted figure who could be counted on for help with various problems. His reputation for fairness and common sense made him an effective mediator for disputes and a reliable source of information about community affairs. The challenges of prohibition enforcement also led Patrick to develop stronger relationships with other community institutions, including schools, churches, and social organizations. He recognized that effective law enforcement required community support, and he worked to strengthen the social networks that helped young people make good choices and helped families address problems before they required police intervention. Patrick's experience reflected the broader challenges that local police faced throughout Chicago during Prohibition. Officers who were rooted in their communities had to balance federal law enforcement requirements with the practical needs of maintaining community relationships and public safety. The most successful approaches generally involved focusing on genuine public safety concerns while avoiding unnecessary intrusion into private behavior that didn't harm others. The immigrant family Sunday gatherings. The Benedetti family had emigrated from Sicily 15 years earlier and had established themselves in the Taylor Street neighborhood, where Giuseppe Sr. worked as a mason while his wife Rosa took care of their 4 children and maintained connections with other Sicilian families in the community. The family lived in a modest apartment above a grocery store, and their life was centered around the rhythms of work, family, and community that had sustained Sicilian families for generations. Sunday gatherings at the Benedetti home had always been important family and community events. After attending Mass at the nearby Catholic church, the family would return home to prepare elaborate meals that brought together multiple generations and various relatives and friends from the neighborhood. These gatherings served not only as social occasions, but as important opportunities for maintaining cultural traditions, sharing information about employment and housing opportunities, and providing mutual support for the challenges of immigrant life in America. Before Prohibition, these Sunday gatherings had typically included wine that Giuseppe Sr. would purchase from local Italian merchants, who imported it from California vineyards or obtained it from other sources that maintained connections to traditional winemaking regions. The wine served not just as a beverage, but as a symbol of cultural continuity and family tradition that connected the Benedetti family to their Sicilian heritage. When the Volstead Act took effect, the Benedetti family faced the challenge of maintaining their cultural traditions while adapting to new legal requirements. Giuseppe Sr. and Rosa were law-abiding citizens who had no desire to engage in illegal activities, but they also wanted to preserve the family and community traditions that gave meaning to their lives and maintained connections to their cultural identity. Family decided to focus on other aspects of their Sunday gatherings that could be maintained and enhanced. Within the new legal framework, Rosa began preparing even more elaborate meals that featured traditional Sicilian recipes and required extensive preparation that involved other family members and neighbors. The cooking itself became a community activity that strengthened social bonds and passed cultural knowledge from older to younger generations. Giuseppe Sr. used his skills as a mason to expand the family's garden space behind their apartment building, creating areas where they could grow tomatoes, herbs, and other ingredients essential to Sicilian cooking. The gardening became a family project that involved the children in learning about traditional food production while providing ingredients that enhanced the quality and authenticity of their Sunday meals. The Benedetti family also began organizing other activities to accompany their Sunday gatherings, including music performances by family members who played traditional instruments, storytelling sessions where older relatives would share memories of life in Sicily, and informal lessons in traditional crafts and skills that connected younger family members to their cultural heritage. These adaptations proved successful in maintaining the family and community functions that had always been served by Sunday gatherings. The emphasis on food preparation, storytelling, and cultural education actually enhanced the meaningful content of these events while demonstrating respect for American laws. The gatherings continued to serve as important opportunities for community building and cultural preservation. Within the new legal environment, the children in the Benedetti family benefited from these enhanced cultural activities, developing stronger connections to their Sicilian heritage while also learning to navigate the balance between maintaining cultural traditions and adapting to American social expectations. The skills they learned in traditional cooking, music, and storytelling became valuable personal resources that enriched their lives and connected them to their family history. The university student's evening studies. Robert Hartwell was a junior at the University of Chicago, studying economics and preparing for a career in business or finance. Robert came from a middle-class family in the suburb of Evanston, and his parents had made significant financial sacrifices to provide him with a university education that would open professional opportunities unavailable to previous generations of their family. The University of Chicago campus was located in the Hyde Park neighborhood, an area that combined academic institutions with comfortable residential districts that housed professors, graduate students, and other members of the university community. Robert lived in a dormitory on campus, but he spent much of his time studying in the university library or attending social events organized by various student organizations and academic departments. Before Prohibition, university social life had included various forms of entertainment that reflected the sophisticated tastes and intellectual interests of the academic community. Faculty members would host dinner parties where students could engage in discussions with professors and visiting scholars, while student organizations would organize social events that provided opportunities for intellectual and cultural exchange among students from different academic disciplines. When the Volstead Act took effect, the university community faced the challenge of maintaining its intellectual and social culture within the new legal framework. University administrators were particularly concerned about ensuring that the institution maintained its reputation for academic excellence and moral leadership, while faculty and students sought ways to preserve the quality of intellectual and social interaction that was essential to university life. Robert observed that the university community adapted to Prohibition with characteristic creativity and intellectual rigor. Faculty dinner parties became more focused on conversation and cultural activities, with elaborate discussions of literature, philosophy, and current events that provided intellectual stimulation beyond what had been typical in earlier social gatherings. Student organizations began organizing cultural events that included lectures, musical performances, and dramatic presentations that enriched campus life while maintaining appropriate Standards of behavior. The university library became an even more important center of campus social life, as students would gather in reading rooms and study areas for both academic work and informal discussions of ideas and current events. Robert found that some of his most meaningful intellectual experiences occurred during late-night study sessions where small groups of students would engage in deep discussions of economic theory, political philosophy, and social issues that connected their academic studies to practical questions about American society. Robert also noticed that Prohibition had created interesting topics for academic study and discussion. Economics professors began analyzing the effects of Prohibition laws on markets, prices, and consumer behavior, while political science faculty examined the constitutional and political issues raised by federal regulation of personal behavior. These academic discussions provided intellectual frameworks for understanding the social changes that were occurring throughout American society. The student newspaper became an important forum for discussing the social and political implications of Prohibition, with students writing thoughtful essays about individual liberty, government authority, and social responsibility that reflected the high level of intellectual engagement that characterized university life. Robert contributed several articles to the newspaper that examined the economic effects of Prohibition on different sectors of the Chicago economy. Robert's experience at the university during Prohibition provided him with intellectual tools and analytical frameworks that proved valuable throughout his subsequent career in business and finance. The ability to analyze complex social and economic issues from multiple perspectives became an important professional skill, while the habits of careful research and thoughtful discussion that he developed during his university years enhanced his effectiveness in various leadership roles. The Settlement House Workers' Community Service. Mary Elizabeth Thompson worked at Hull House, the famous settlement house established by Jane Addams in the near West Side neighborhood that served as a center for social service and community education for the diverse immigrant communities that lived in the surrounding area. Mary had graduated from a women's college in the East and had come to Chicago to participate in the social reform movement that was addressing the challenges of urban poverty and immigrant integration. Hull House provided a wide range of services to neighborhood residents, including English language classes, vocational training, child care, health education, and cultural programs that helped immigrants adapt to American society while maintaining connections to their cultural heritage. The Settlement House philosophy emphasized both practical assistance and community empowerment, helping residents develop the skills and knowledge they needed to improve their living conditions and participate effectively in American democracy. Before Prohibition, Hull House had taken a strong position in support of temperance reform, viewing excessive alcohol consumption as one of the factors that contributed to poverty, domestic violence, and other social problems that affected the immigrant families they served. Jane Addams and other Settlement House leaders had been active in advocating for legislation that would address the social problems associated with alcohol abuse, while also supporting other reforms that addressed underlying causes of urban poverty. When the Volstead Act took effect, Mary and her colleagues at Hull House faced complex challenges in adapting their programs and services to the new legal and social environment. While they had supported temperance reform, they also recognized that Prohibition created new problems that required thoughtful responses from social service organizations. One of the most significant challenges was that traditional neighborhood gathering places, including many ethnic taverns and social clubs, had been forced to close, leaving immigrant communities without important centers for social interaction and mutual support. Mary observed that this loss was particularly difficult for recent immigrants who depended on these informal networks for information about employment, opportunities, housing, and other practical aspects of American life. Hull House responded by expanding their community programming to provide alternative venues for social interaction and community building. They organized more evening programs that brought together families from different ethnic backgrounds, created new recreational activities for young people who might otherwise lack constructive ways to spend their free time, and developed cultural programs that allowed different immigrant groups to share their traditions with the broader community. Mary also noticed that Prohibition had created new challenges for some of the families that Hull House served. The loss of legitimate employment in breweries, distilleries, and related businesses had affected many immigrant workers, while the emergence of illegal alcohol markets created opportunities for criminal involvement that posed particular dangers for young men who lacked other economic opportunities. Hull House developed new vocational training programs designed to help workers who had lost jobs in alcohol-related industries transition to other forms of employment. They also expanded their youth programs to provide alternatives to street life for young people who might be tempted by the quick money available through involvement in illegal activities. Mary found that her work at Hull House during Prohibition required greater sensitivity to the diverse cultural traditions and social needs of the immigrant communities they served, while maintaining their commitment to social reform and community improvement. Hull House workers had to recognize that different ethnic groups had different relationships to alcohol that were deeply connected to their cultural identities and social traditions. The settlement house approach of combining practical assistance with community empowerment proved effective in helping immigrant families navigate the challenges created by Prohibition while maintaining their commitment to law-abiding citizenship. By providing alternative venues for social interaction and community support, Hull House helped preserve the social networks that were essential to immigrant communities while encouraging constructive adaptation to changing legal and social conditions. The small business owner's innovation Samuel Goldberg owned a small delicatessen on Maxwell Street, in the heart of Chicago's Jewish neighborhood, where he served traditional Jewish foods to residents of the surrounding area while also attracting customers from other parts of the city who appreciated authentic ethnic cuisine. Samuel had emigrated from Eastern Europe 20 years earlier and had built his business through careful attention to food quality, customer service, and maintaining connections to the Jewish community's cultural traditions. The delicatessen occupied a narrow storefront in a busy commercial district where Jewish merchants sold everything from clothing to household goods to traditional foods that maintained connections to old world traditions. Samuel's shop was known for its excellent pastrami, fresh rye bread, and traditional Jewish specialties that were prepared according to dietary laws and family recipes that had been passed down through generations. Before Prohibition, Samuel had also sold wine and other alcoholic beverages that were important for Jewish religious observances and holiday celebrations. The sale of kosher wine for religious purposes was a significant part of his business, and it also served important community functions by ensuring that Jewish families could obtain appropriate beverages for Sabbath dinners, wedding celebrations, and holiday observances that were central to their religious and cultural life. When the Volstead Act took effect, Samuel discovered that the law included specific provisions for the use of wine in religious ceremonies, which meant that he could continue to serve the religious needs of his community while operating within the new legal framework. However, the regulations were complex and required careful documentation and compliance with federal oversight that added administrative burdens to his business operations. Samuel approached these new requirements with the same meticulous attention to detail that he brought to all aspects of his business. He maintained careful records of wine sales for religious purposes, ensured that all transactions complied with federal regulations, and worked with local rabbis to verify that his customers were obtaining wine for legitimate religious observances, rather than for social consumption that would violate Prohibition laws. The adaptation proved successful in maintaining the religious and cultural functions that Samuel's business had always served, while demonstrating respect for American laws and regulations. His reputation for integrity and compliance with regulations enhanced his standing in both the Jewish community and the broader business district, while his careful adherence to documentation requirements protected his business from potential legal problems. Samuel also discovered that Prohibition created opportunities to expand other aspects of his business that weren't affected by the new regulations. He began offering catering services for Jewish weddings, bar mitzvahs, and other celebrations, providing traditional foods and expert knowledge of dietary requirements that made these events successful while maintaining appropriate religious observances. The catering business proved profitable and enhanced Samuel's reputation as someone who understood how to combine traditional Jewish culture with modern American business practices. His success in adapting to Prohibition while maintaining his community service functions made him a respected figure in both the Jewish community and the broader business district where his delicatessen operated. Samuel's experience reflected the broader adaptation strategies that ethnic business owners employed throughout Chicago during Prohibition. By focusing on the aspects of their businesses that served legitimate community needs while carefully complying with new legal requirements, they were able to maintain their economic viability while preserving their cultural and social functions within their communities. The wealthy widow's charitable work. Mrs. Eleanor Ashford was the widow of a prominent Chicago businessman who had made his fortune in the grain trading industry that connected Chicago to agricultural regions throughout the Midwest. Eleanor lived in a grand mansion on Prairie Avenue, in the neighborhood that had been home to Chicago's wealthiest families since the city's reconstruction after the Great Fire. Her home was filled with art collections, fine furniture, and the accumulated treasures of a family that had prospered during Chicago's rapid growth into one of America's major cities. Eleanor had always been active in Chicago's charitable and cultural organizations, serving on the boards of hospitals, orphanages, and cultural institutions that provided essential services to the city's residents while also enhancing Chicago's reputation as a center of civilization and refinement. Her charitable work was both a personal calling and a social responsibility that reflected her family's position in Chicago society and their commitment to civic improvement. Before Prohibition, Eleanor's charitable activities had included organizing fundraising events that brought together Chicago's social and business elite in support of various worthy causes. These events typically featured elaborate dinner parties, cultural performances, and auctions of donated items that raised substantial amounts of money while also providing opportunities for wealthy families to bestow mailers to demonstrate their commitment to civic responsibility and community service. When the Volstead Act took effect, Eleanor faced the challenge of adapting her charitable fundraising activities to the new legal environment while maintaining their effectiveness in generating support for important community causes. She recognized that the social aspects of fundraising events were essential to their success, but she also understood that her events needed to set appropriate examples of law-abiding behavior for Chicago's social leadership. Eleanor worked with other prominent women in Chicago society to develop new approaches to charitable fundraising that emphasized cultural education, community service, and social improvement rather than simple social entertainment. They organized elaborate cultural events that featured performances by Chicago Symphony Orchestra musicians, lectures by university professors, and exhibitions of local artists' work that provided intellectual and cultural enrichment while raising money for charitable purposes. These cultural fundraising events proved highly successful, attracting support from wealthy families throughout Chicago while also enhancing the city's reputation for cultural sophistication and civic engagement. Eleanor's leadership in adapting charitable fundraising to the Prohibition era demonstrated how Chicago's social elite could maintain their community leadership roles while adapting to changing legal and social expectations. Eleanor also used her charitable work to address some of the social problems that were emerging as consequences of Prohibition. She supported expanded programs for youth services, recognizing that young people needed constructive alternatives to street life during a period when traditional community institutions were being disrupted by legal changes. She also provided funding for medical services that could address health problems related to industrial alcohol consumption, though such services were carefully structured to avoid encouraging illegal behavior. The success of Eleanor's adapted charitable activities influenced other wealthy families throughout Chicago to modify their own community service approaches in ways that maintained their civic leadership while demonstrating appropriate respect for federal law. This collective adaptation by Chicago's social elite helped maintain community institutions and services during a period of significant social change. Eleanor's most significant contribution during this period was the establishment of the Prairie Avenue Community Center, which occupied a former commercial building that she purchased and renovated specifically to serve the needs of working-class families in the surrounding neighborhoods. The center provided a range of services that addressed both immediate practical needs and longer-term community development goals. The community center included a medical clinic staffed by volunteer physicians who provided basic health services to families who might not otherwise have access to medical care. Eleanor recognized that public health was both a moral responsibility and a practical necessity for maintaining a stable and productive community, and she was willing to invest her personal resources in ensuring that essential services were available to all residents regardless of their economic circumstances. Eleanor also established vocational training programs at the community center that taught practical skills to young men and women who were seeking employment in Chicago's rapidly changing economy. These programs included instruction in office work, mechanical skills, and domestic sciences that prepared students for jobs that offered opportunities for economic advancement and stable employment. The training programs were staffed by volunteers from Chicago's professional community who donated their time and expertise to help working-class young people develop the skills they needed for economic success. The community center became a focal point for Eleanor's charitable work, providing a venue where she could coordinate various forms of assistance, while also creating opportunities for meaningful interaction between Chicago's wealthy and working-class residents. Eleanor spent several hours each week at the center, working directly with program participants and learning about the challenges and aspirations of families from very different backgrounds than her own. Through her work at the community center, Eleanor developed a more sophisticated understanding of urban poverty and the complex factors that affected working-class families' ability to achieve economic stability and social advancement. She learned that effective charity required not just financial resources, but also careful attention to the specific needs and circumstances of the people being served, as well as respect for their dignity and autonomy. Eleanor's charitable philosophy evolved during the Prohibition era to emphasize empowerment and education rather than simple material assistance. She believed that the most effective forms of charity were those that helped people develop the skills and knowledge they needed to improve their own circumstances, rather than creating long-term dependence on charitable assistance. This philosophy influenced all aspects of Eleanor's charitable work, from the design of specific programs to the way she interacted with program participants. The community center programs were structured to provide not just immediate assistance, but also education and skills development that would enable participants to achieve greater independence and self-sufficiency over time. Eleanor's work during the Prohibition era demonstrated how wealthy individuals could use their resources and social position to address community problems in ways that were both effective and respectful of the people being served. Her commitment to direct personal involvement in charitable work, combined with her willingness to learn from the people she served, made her an influential model for other wealthy families who were seeking meaningful ways to contribute to their communities. The Prairie Avenue Community Center continued operating throughout the Prohibition era and beyond, serving thousands of Chicago families while also influencing the development of social service programs throughout the city. Eleanor's approach to charitable work helped establish principles of community service that emphasized dignity, empowerment, and mutual respect between people from different economic and social backgrounds. The newspaper Reporter's Daily Observations. James Mitchell worked as a reporter for the Chicago Tribune, covering local news and social developments in a city that was experiencing rapid change during the early years of Prohibition. James had grown up in Chicago and had developed his journalistic skills through years of observing and writing about the political, economic, and social forces that shape life in one of America's most dynamic cities. James's work required him to maintain connections throughout Chicago's diverse neighborhoods and communities, gathering information about events and trends that affected different segments of the city's population. His reporting covered everything from city politics to business developments to social issues, and he had developed a reputation for careful observation and balanced reporting that made his articles trusted sources of information for Tribune readers. When Prohibition took effect, James found himself documenting a city in transition, observing how different communities and institutions were adapting to significant legal and social changes. His reporting provided detailed accounts of how various aspects of Chicago life were being affected by the new laws, from the closing of familiar neighborhood establishments to the emergence of new forms of social organization and entertainment. James observed that Prohibition was creating different effects in different parts of the city, depending on the economic resources, cultural traditions, and social structures of various neighborhoods and communities. Wealthy areas were adapting through private social arrangements and alternative forms of entertainment, while working-class neighborhoods were losing important community gathering places without necessarily finding adequate replacements. His reporting documented both the intended and unintended consequences of Prohibition laws, noting how the elimination of legal alcohol sales was affecting employment in related industries, changing patterns of social interaction, and creating new challenges for law enforcement and community organization. James approached these topics with journalistic objectivity, reporting facts and observations rather than advocating for particular political positions. The newspaper provided an important forum for community discussion of Prohibition-related issues, publishing letters from readers who shared their experiences and perspectives on how the new laws were affecting their daily lives. James found that these reader contributions provided valuable insights into the diverse ways that Chicago residents were experiencing and adapting to social change. James's reporting during the early years of Prohibition created a historical record of how a major American city adapted to significant legal and social changes. His articles documented both successful adaptation strategies and emerging problems, providing information that helped Tribune readers understand the complex effects of federal legislation on local community life. The skills James developed in reporting on Prohibition-era social changes proved valuable throughout his subsequent journalism career, as he learned to analyze complex social phenomena from multiple perspectives while maintaining objectivity and accuracy in his reporting. His work during this period established his reputation as a reliable observer of Chicago's social and political developments. The Hardest narrative established his reputation as a reliable observer of Chicago's social and political developments. The school principal's educational philosophy. Margaret Sinclair served as principal of Lincoln Elementary School in a neighborhood that was home to families from various European immigrant backgrounds. including Irish, German, Italian, and Polish residents who had settled in Chicago during the decades of rapid industrial growth. The school served children from working-class families whose parents were employed in the city's factories, stockyards, and transportation industries. Margaret had been an educator for more than 20 years and had developed strong convictions about the role of public schools in helping immigrant children adapt to American society while maintaining respect for their family cultures and traditions. She believed that education should provide children with both the practical skills they needed for economic success and the cultural knowledge they needed for responsible citizenship in a democratic society. Before Prohibition, Margaret's approach to education had emphasized both academic subjects and character development, with particular attention to helping children from different cultural backgrounds learn to work together effectively while maintaining pride in their family heritage. The school served as an important community institution that brought together families from different ethnic groups and provided opportunities for mutual understanding and cooperation. When the Volstead Act took effect, Margaret recognized that the school would need to address the social changes that were affecting the families and communities they served. While schools were not directly involved in alcohol-related issues, the social disruption caused by closing neighborhood gathering places and changing community institutions affected the stability and social cohesion that were important for children's educational development. Margaret worked with her teaching staff to develop educational programs that would help children understand the importance of following laws while also respecting the cultural traditions and family values that were important to their parents. This required careful attention to presenting civic education in ways that didn't create conflicts between school teachings and family beliefs, while also helping children develop critical thinking skills that would serve them throughout their lives. The school also expanded its community programming to provide alternative venues for neighborhood social interaction and cultural exchange. Margaret organized evening programs that brought together families from different ethnic backgrounds, cultural events that allowed different immigrant groups to share their traditions, and educational activities that help parents learn about American civic institutions while maintaining connections to their cultural heritage. These community programs proved successful in maintaining the social cohesion and mutual understanding that were essential for effective education in a diverse neighborhood. The school became an even more important community institution during Prohibition, providing stability and continuity during a period of significant social change. Margaret's educational philosophy during this period emphasized the importance of helping children develop both practical skills and ethical reasoning that would enable them to make good decisions throughout their lives, regardless of the specific legal or social challenges they might face. This approach proved valuable in preparing students for citizenship in a society that was experiencing rapid change and required individuals who could adapt to new circumstances while maintaining their personal integrity. The church pastor's community leadership, Reverend Thomas Anderson, served as pastor of St. Matthew's Lutheran Church in a neighborhood that was home to German and Scandinavian immigrant families who had settled in Chicago during the late 19th century. The church provided both religious services and community leadership for families who maintained strong connections to their European heritage while adapting to American life and citizenship. Reverend Anderson had emigrated from Germany as a young man and had received his theological education at a Lutheran seminary in the Midwest before accepting his calling to serve the immigrant community in Chicago. His ministry emphasized both traditional Lutheran theology and practical guidance for the challenges of immigrant life in an industrial American city. The church served as more than a place of worship. It was a community center that provided social services, cultural programs, and mutual support networks that helped immigrant families maintain their cultural identity while adapting to American society. Before Prohibition, church social events had included traditional German celebrations that brought together multiple generations and maintained connections to Old World customs and traditions. When the Volstead Act took effect, Reverend Anderson faced the challenge of providing moral leadership for his congregation while navigating the complex relationship between religious tradition, cultural practice, and federal law. Lutheran theology emphasized both obedience to legitimate government authority and the importance of individual conscience in moral decision-making, creating potential tensions that required careful pastoral guidance. Reverend Anderson approached these challenges by emphasizing the underlying moral and spiritual principles that were more fundamental than specific legal requirements or cultural practices. He preached about the importance of moderation, family responsibility, and community service as values that could be maintained regardless of changing legal circumstances, while also encouraging respect for legitimate government, authority, and law-abiding citizenship. The church adapted its social and cultural programs to focus more extensively on activities that strengthened family relationships, provided constructive outlets for young people, and maintained cultural traditions through music, food, and storytelling rather than through practices that might conflict with federal laws. These adaptations proved successful in maintaining the community functions that the church had always served while demonstrating appropriate respect for American legal institutions. Reverend Anderson also used his pastoral role to provide guidance for families who were struggling with the practical and moral challenges created by Prohibition. He emphasized the importance of maintaining family unity, supporting community institutions, and making decisions based on genuine moral principles, rather than simply following social pressures or popular opinions. The church's approach to Prohibition demonstrated how religious institutions could provide moral leadership and community stability during periods of significant social change. By focusing on fundamental values and community service rather than specific political or legal issues, the church maintained its effectiveness as a source of guidance and support for immigrant families, adapting to changing American society. The evening's gentle close as our journey through Prohibition-era Chicago draws to a peaceful close. We can reflect on the remarkable adaptability of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. In kitchens and parlors, workshops and offices, neighbors and families found ways to preserve what mattered most to them while respecting the laws of their adopted country. Giuseppe continued baking his bread each dawn, the familiar rhythm of his work connecting him to generations of bakers before him. Catherine's dinner parties evolved into salons where ideas flourished alongside friendships. Dr. Schmidt maintained his professional integrity while serving his community's health needs. Michael and his Polish neighbors created new traditions that honored old ones. Louis discovered that music could find its way into any venue where people gathered, while Officer O'Malley learned that fairness and community connection were more important than rigid rule enforcement. The Benedetti family proved that cultural traditions could be preserved and even strengthened through creative adaptation. And Robert found that intellectual curiosity could transform social challenges into opportunities for understanding. Each of these stories reminds us that history is made not by dramatic gestures, but by the daily choices of ordinary people who navigate change with dignity, creativity, and respect for both law and community. In the neighborhoods of Chicago during those transformative years, we see the best qualities of American society: adaptability, ingenuity, and the quiet determination to maintain family and community connections regardless of external circumstances. The city that emerged from the Prohibition era was strengthened by the experience of adaptation and innovation that its residents had demonstrated. Communities had learned to rely more heavily on schools, churches, and cultural organizations for social cohesion. Families had developed stronger internal bonds through shared challenges and creative solutions. Business owners had discovered new approaches to serving their community's needs. Perhaps most importantly, Chicago's diverse population had demonstrated that Americans from many different backgrounds could find common ground in their commitment to both lawfulness and community. The German baker, the Irish police officer, the Polish factory worker, the Italian family, the Jewish merchant, and the Protestant pastor had all found ways to contribute to their city's adaptation to changing times. As you settle into sleep tonight, carry with you the gentle example of these Chicago residents who faced uncertainty with grace and creativity. Their stories remind us that even during the most challenging times, communities can preserve what matters most through mutual respect, practical wisdom, and the quiet determination to build better lives for themselves and their children. The streetlights of 1920s Chicago have long since dimmed, but the spirit of adaptation and community service that characterized that era continues to inspire us. In the gentle rhythm of Giuseppe's bread making, the thoughtful conversations at Catherine's dinner table, and the loving traditions of the Benedetti family's Sunday gatherings, we find timeless lessons about how ordinary people create extraordinary communities through their daily choices and caring interactions. Rest well, knowing that the story of human adaptation and community building continues in countless neighborhoods and families around the world, where people still gather to share meals, support each other through challenges, and preserve the traditions that connect us to both our past and our future. And so our gentle journey through Chicago's Prohibition years comes to its peaceful end, leaving us with the quiet satisfaction of having spent time with neighbors from long ago who faced their challenges with dignity, creativity, and unwavering commitment to their families and communities.